And again, you don't put that reserve onto any particular task, because if you did, then people would just think, oh, I've got that money to spend. You know, when your daughter went shopping for school supplies, if you gave her $100 bill and said, you know, bring me back the change, suddenly she'd come back with $99 worth of school supplies, you know, whether she needed them or not.
That's exactly what happened last night.
Uh-oh.
Yes, I gave her $100, and that's exactly what happened.
Uh-oh, now you're thinking this is some kind of freaky, you know, like I'm stalking you situation where I'm making up these completely random
I
numbers.
gave her $100, and she came back. Actually, she gave me a $5 bill and some change.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
See, that was not quite right on, but that, you know, that does
but
happen. So you
on
don't want
there.
the job to expand to fit the reserves. You actually want to use those as reserves.
Well, if I gave her $200, she would have spent the $200 and come back and given me $5. So,
And that is truly the case.
yeah,
So, and you know, the same thing, you know, why you have hammock tasks to kind of, you know, absorb the buffers, if you will. So, you know, things might have to align because, again, in scheduling, if you give somebody 2 weeks to do something and it only takes a week, they'll think, oh, good, I have, you know, 3 or 4 days to goof off before I really get started on this.
that's the truth with everything, including even schoolwork.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we all procrastinate, unfortunately.
Well, the line that I used probably most often on my daughter regarding schoolwork is the teacher wouldn't have given you a week if he or she thought you could do it the night before.
That's right.
So, you know, that you got to plan things out a little bit, and you've got to, you know, do some research and this and that, and you can't get all frantic the night before when you don't have you know, the right book or access to the software or rubber cement or whatever is, you know, the critical item for that end item project. So, but it's all risk. So the definition of project risk management, the knowledge area, is the processes of conducting risk management planning, identification, analysis, response planning, response implementation, and monitoring risks on a project. So the key objective of risk management is to increase the probability and impact of positive events and decrease the probability and impact of negative events. So always remember that positivity, because we want to make sure that we're not waylaid by a question that's talking about positivity. So here's a business scenario for a problem statement. And since we are trying to get through in 2 hours, we'll just kind of go through this, and we'll look at Cynthia is managing a new large complex construction project involving a gas station. And say in our analogous estimating world, none of the previous projects had a gas station and convenience store component. And so part of it is a way for the company to diversify. But again, this can be a career make or break, because obviously there are pitfalls to be found. So the team wants to bring the company to life but lacks a strong risk management process. So what should Cynthia do, and submit it prior to the project's first milestone in 3 weeks? So again, obviously risk has been handled poorly in the past, and she should try to find if there are any internal risk experts, because obviously the documentation wasn't really there.
Well, couldn't she use a decision tree?
Well, and certainly she could. And again, she might want to identify the subject matter experts, and again, find out more. You know, nowadays you just Google it, because, you know, in the old days when Google was people, you know, you'd go and you'd talk to people, but now you just kind of Google it. Again, you might look at historical documents, but it sounds like if they handled risk poorly, there might not be risk documents from completed projects. But if there was a project management office, if there was a project management library, and if those documents were retrievable by some search term, again, that could point out other stakeholders and subject matter experts who might be able to contribute to the risk planning process. So again, you've got to identify, you've got to prioritize, and then you've got to develop the plan. So basically, that's what we're trying to say
Okay.
with risk. So if we look at risk, we've got 5 risk processes in the planning phase. So obviously we've got, you know, of that process group, we have a whole lot of planning to be done. And again, because risk is a heavy hitter, and, you know, second only to schedule management in terms of really getting the plan down to make sure that we get everything under control. It's surprising the cost has only 3, but they're a big 3. And then during executing, we obviously want to implement our risk responses. And then at monitoring and control, we're going to monitor our risks. So if you get a risk related process that you have to put into place, or figure out where it belongs in this kind of matrix, implement risk response is your implement, your active verb, so that's an executing process. And monitor risks obviously has the monitor word, so everything else is in the planning process group. So first we're going to talk about plan risk management. And so in plan risk management, we have the process of defining how to conduct risk management activities for a project. The key benefit of this process is it ensures that the degree, type, and visibility of risk management are proportionate to both risks and importance of the project to the organization and other stakeholders. So keeping that all in mind, the plan risk management is really just still writing the plan. It's not really actually doing, performing any risk management. But we have as input the charter, because remember the charter had high-level risks in it. We have the project management plan, the project documents, including the risk management plan. We have our EEFs and our OPAs, and then the tools and techniques we use are our expert judgment and our data analysis and meetings. And then what comes out of it is the risk management plan. So we're all very happy with that when the risk management plan comes out of plan risk management. At least I am. Now we want to look at the definition impact scale. So there are basically 3 project objectives that could be affected by a risk. And right, so we're looking at the project objectives that could be affected by a risk. And so basically the 4 areas that a risk could touch would be our scope, cost, and time triangle. Remember that we said that virtually all issues involve scope, cost, or time. And if you touch any one of those, you touch more than one of those. And the sort of the 4th component to that, if you had like a quadrangle of doom, would be quality, which is of course the conformance to requirements. So anytime you change one of the requirements or expound upon that, and it becomes larger and more intense than initially thought, that is potentially a risk to your project. So then you have some kind of rating for the risk. So you might have a very low, low, moderate, high, and very high, on our 0 to 1 continuum. And again, the numbers are arbitrary. Obviously, they have to go from a lower number to a higher number. And generally, the way that your company feels about risk. So, for instance, a very low scope risk might be a barely noticeable change, whereas a very low cost risk would be insignificant, as well as for time. And again, quality would be barely noticeable nonconformance to requirements. Whereas, and you notice these aren't even evenly spaced, so they don't have to be evenly spaced. A low risk might be minor areas, less than 10% cost, less than 5% schedule, few parameters. And so on up the line to where we get to a very high risk is the entire scope is rendered useless. So that's very bad. Obviously, more than a 40% cost increase, more than a 20% schedule change, or need to scrap the entire project. So again, these are basically, nothing you need to memorize for the test, because this would be something your company would develop and would be there. So, not only would it be their numbers along the top here, but it would also be their numbers in these boxes, where you have numbers depending on how risk tolerant or risk averse the company management felt like they could be. So what are we going to do with our risks? So we've made our plan. So what are we going to do now? We're going to identify risks, and that's the process of identifying individual project risks as well as sources of overall project risk and documenting their characteristics. And remember, risks, opportunities, or threats. So in order to identify the risk, this is like anything else that's very important in terms of, identifying requirements, identifying schedule issues, identifying cost issues. So you're going to try to throw a lot of stuff at it. So we've got a lot of documents out here, including agreements that you might have with other contractors or other service providers. potentially procurement documentation, that kind of carries on its own weight because that's usually bound by a whole lot more legal issues. And then we've got our EEFs and OPAs. And our tools and techniques are expert judgment, data gathering, data analysis, interpersonal and team skills, prompt lists, and meetings. And where, prompt lists give you the idea of, really what risks might be coming up. And then what comes out of the identify risks are the risk register. So this is, we'll talk about the stakeholder register later, but this is almost like the WBS dictionary for risks. So it talks a lot about the risks, what might cause it to occur, what are the symptoms of it having had occurred, who are the affected parties, what are the affected resources, etc. And then we've also got a risk report, and then any project document updates, because some risks might then preclude other work or other things happening. Okay, another way we can evaluate risk is to perform qualitative risk analysis, and this process prioritizes individual project risks for further analysis or action by assessing their probability of occurrence and impact as well as other characteristics. And because this is qualitative, this isn't numerically based. This is even less numerically based.
And this is subjective.
Right. Yeah, this is even more subjective than the subjective numerical assessments that we talked about. So again, we put in our documents, and our tools and techniques include our data gathering, our expert judgment, interpersonal skills. We're going to come up with categories and have meetings and discuss what risks are worse than other ones, because basically this is the only thing we could say. It's bigger than a small cell phone and smaller than a bread box, or however we do it. And so the thing that comes out of qualitative risk analysis is project document updates. And again, remember, because we've got qualitative, and next we're going to have, in a minute we're going to have quantitative. So make sure make sure you know which one the question is asking about. So here's a probability and impact matrix. And again, the probability numbers in the far left-hand column are subject to your corporate information, and the impact, again, you decide how to number these. And you notice we've got mirror images here. So we've got the threats, so all our negative things, and we've got our opportunities, which are our positive things. So the high value threats obviously are ones that we want to deal with. When we come up to a relatively large number, we want to deal with those and spend a lot more time managing and monitoring those than we do the ones down here. So, the ones down here might be pretty much ignore, and then the ones in through the middle might be keep a little bit of an eye on, but the ones up here, obviously we want to keep a very close eye on. And alternatively, on the opportunity side, we definitely want to take advantage of these potentially high payoff opportunities, and then we have a less full attention on the mid-range ones, and then for the small ones, this is just kind of the accept. If it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. So make sure you understand the general character of the probability and impacts matrix, both that it has threats and opportunities, and that you assign a probability, and then you assign an impact to the threats and the opportunities, and come up with that this is the look at a lot range, and then down in the other corner is the not look at very hard range. So next we're going to perform quantitative risk analysis, and this is the process of numerically analyzing the combined effect of individual project risks and other sources of uncertainty on the overall project objectives. So again, quantitative is a little bit more numerical than the qualitative. So make sure you look at the question carefully. So again, we have our documents that are our inputs to the process. We have our tools and techniques, which are fairly similar: the judgment, the data gathering, the interpersonal team skills, and the prompt list. And we have our data analysis. So, and again, we have the same output, which is the project document updates. And again, the quantitative risks are the ones that are much more numerical in nature. So next, we're going to plan risk responses, and that's the process of developing options, selecting strategies, and agreeing on actions to address overall project risk exposure, as well as to treat individual project risks. So we have our inputs, which are relatively familiar. We have a whole lot of tools and techniques for dealing with risk responses, expert judgment, strategies for threats, strategies for overall project risks, data gathering, strategies for opportunities, because remember, we've got to always think about the positive side, data analysis, interpersonal and team skills, contingent response strategies, and decision making. So out of this process, our outputs include change requests, because remember, we might want to take a preventative or corrective action, but it does have to go through the process. Updates to the project management plan, as well as updates to other projects. So in terms of terminology, residual risks are those risks that remain after the risk responses were implemented. So if you have a risk and you have a plan, there's probably still some amount of residual risk. So say you're framing a house and it starts, you've got rain in the forecast. So ideally what you want to do is you want to either slap up the plywood really quick, or you want to throw some tarps over. And so depending on how quickly and efficiently you do that, you might still have a little bit of residual risk in that some of the 2x4s are still going to get wet. And the secondary risks potentially arise out of implementing risk responses. So if you did throw some tarps up there, well, you've got to take the tarps down before you actually put up the plywood. So, that's it. And the tarps are probably an added cost, and, they might blow away or whatever. But, or if you throw the plywood up there really quickly, maybe you don't do it as well as you normally would have on a day when the rain wasn't approaching. So again, secondary risks arise out of implementing the risk responses. So residual is what's left after you.
Oh, and then you have secondary risks.
Secondary risks are actually kind of caused by the risk implementation plan. Oh. So residual risks are those that are, stuff that's still left to happen even after you implement your plan.
Okay, but the secondary risks are a result of implementing the risk strategies.
Exactly, yes. So make sure you know that terminology, because that is a potential area for questions. Okay, so in terms of implementing risk responses, this is the process of implementing agreed upon risk response plans. The key benefit of this process is it ensures that agreed upon risk responses are executed as planned in order to address overall project risk exposure, minimize individual project threats, and maximize overall project opportunities. So again, to implement these risk responses, and remember, these could be either positive or negative risks. So we've got project management plan, work performance data, and work performance reports all going in to implement risk responses. And then we use tools and techniques such as expert judgment, interpersonal and team skills, and our project management information system. And remember, that's all of our potential communication schemes. That's all of our potential software tools. That's everything we've got, our whole toolbox full of potentials for implementing risk responses. And out of that comes potential document updates and potential for change requests. So the next thing we want to do is we want to monitor risks, and we want to make sure that the implementation of the agreed upon risk response plans, the tracking, the identifying, the analyzing, and the evaluating is indeed effective. So again, because it has monitor in the name, now this is part of the monitoring and controlling process group. So we've got our 4 inputs, which are the project management plan, the project documents, the work performance data, and the work performance reports. And again, this work performance data input travels through the processes and comes out as work performance information. And so how are we going to monitor risks? Well, we're going to do audits, we're going to reassess, and we're going to have meetings. So again, depending on your project's level of risk and risk tolerance determines how often you might want to evaluate risks. So, and depending on the criticality of the risk or the near term of the risk, might also depend, it might change as the project continues. So what you come out with is work performance information from the work performance data, the potential for change requests, and then updates to the project management plan as well as the other project documents, and then potential updates to your organizational process assets.